Okay, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining this session presentation discussion about the AI-powered survey agent developed and used in a real-world assessment, which is the after-action review of the UNICEF response to Typhoon Yagi in Vietnam. My name is Ali Saparnajad. I'm a multi-country evaluation specialist for UNICEF based in Bangkok. And just a housekeeping note, the meeting is being recorded for later sharing with gLOCALs for the records and socialization. So I see people are coming in. Just admit. All right. Let's move on because we have 1 hour, and my plan for this session is to cover the context and the situation and the purpose and the of the after action review, and then talk a little bit about the approach I took to the after action review, and then demonstrate the AI survey agent, take a good bit of 10 minutes to do that, and then show you a bit under the hood, the conceptual model of the survey agent, and then also demonstrate another element of this, which was the AI Analyst agent that analyzes the output of that survey, and then discuss a bit about the learnings and the implications of all this experimentation for evaluation, and then I'll open it for a Q&A and discussion. So hopefully if everything goes according to plan, it will be 40 minutes and then open up to QA. All right, so moving on. Just a bit of background. Typhoon Yagi hit Vietnam on September 7th last year. It was the strongest storm in Vietnam in 30 years, and it caused hundreds of casualties, and it put children at significant risk of malnutrition, distress, and weeks of lost learning. UNICEF quickly mobilized the response and provided essential supplies and HCT to the affected households and coordinated with partners to mobilize funds for the response. We also commissioned an after-action review to learn from the ongoing response and to improve preparedness for future emergencies. And I managed this after-action review and co-led it with an independent evaluator who's an expert in humanitarian after-action reviews. Her name is Moira Frata, and she couldn't join us today because she's on assignment in a remote location. So to situate this after-action review and its approach, it's important to recall a couple of points. One is that time is a key constraint in emergency response, and people are filling multiple roles and making decisions with direct impact on the lives and well-being and safety. So very little time to have reflections or reviews. And secondly, that in emergency response, the country office assembles a specialized team, and that team draws from across the sections in the office as well as other offices across the region. The team then executes the response within a fixed time frame, and then they rejoin their duty stations or assignment. So by the time we've started the review, many are back in their offices doing their regular work on their regular times. And one other particularity of this after-action review was that we work with a much smaller budget compared to other after-action reviews in recent years. And we were restricted to a narrow window of 25 days to complete the after-action review because of the conditions that were placed on the funding and the source that was used. So these constraints are new, of course, and they're not unique to this emergency. We have real-time evaluation approaches that are meant to address these to some extent, but I did wonder, can AI help us to further address these constraints, to make us more efficient, allow a fair representation of the stakeholders, be richer in the depth of analysis, and to deliver all of that faster and less burden on the office? So this was the motivation for the inclusion of AI. And I've been tinkering with large language models for some time, and decided to pilot one of the tools I developed, which is an AI-powered survey agent. alongside our traditional methods for data collection, which would be done by the independent evaluator, Moira. So I took a mixed approach to the AR to test out this idea and get the evidence that we need for the review. Our expert evaluator would be doing the traditional key informant interview, focus group discussions, desk review, and in parallel, use the AI agent to do the semi-structured interviews with some other key informants. For the data analysis too, I decided to have a mixed approach. So the narrative analysis of the transcripts from the key informant interviews and discussions, and using a custom AI-powered thematic analyst to analyze the transcripts of the interviews that were done by the AI agent. Then all the evidence would be triangulated or biangulated in this case, because there's two sources, and integrated into findings and validated with the stakeholders in a workshop. We also decided to have equal numbers of informants interviewed by the agent and by the live evaluator. And since this was the first time to pilot the tool to minimize any risks, we used the AI agent only with our internal UNICEF stakeholders, and external key informants were interviewed in person. So now to the AI agent, and just let me add a few other people who are in the lobby. So introducing the AI agent, and before I demo the agent, I do want to point out a few key features that you should look out for when you meet it. And in plain language, this agent is a conversational intelligent interface that conducts semi-structured interviews. And what makes it unique is this mix of the strengths of the online survey and human interviews without some of the shortfalls of each one. So for example, it avoids the intra-interviewer enumerator reliability issues because you have one agent that conducts all of the interviews. And like online surveys, everything is digitally recorded, so there's no transfer or transcription errors, and it self-corrects or seeks clarification on responses that are unclear, just like a human interviewer would do, which further improves the accuracy. Its questions are also adapted to the flow of the conversation, and it's fully informed on the set of documents that are provided to it. It probes the respondents to get to a deeper understanding of their answers, which all makes the inquiry more rich. And it's also accessible. It interprets and speaks in multiple languages. It allows audio input if you prefer that instead of typing. And it can run on your browser or smartphone screen or on your computer. So after the demo, I'll show you a bit more about what's under the hood. But for now, let's get to meeting the AI agent. Let me now switch over my screen. Okay. Everyone is seeing that? Yes, great. Awesome. So just two things to note here is that the answers that I'll be putting into the survey are fictitious. So I'm just making this information up. And that the agent is slightly revised from what was actually run in the Yagi after action review to be able to do this survey in a shorter amount of time, in the 10 minutes or 15 minutes that I have. So it'll probably be probing less and a few questions are eliminated from it. So you see in the landing page that it introduces the survey, the Yagi response. The first question appears here. This is where we type our answers. The send button sends it out. So the first question is, hello, which language do you prefer for this survey, English, Vietnamese, or French? So just to entertain and show you that it does speak multiple languages, I'll just say Vietnamese, please, and I'll switch it back to English right after. So Ciao Ban. After this, I may need to actually translate this to show you. This says, hi, would you like to take part in the survey about UNICEF's response to Typhoon Yagi? The survey is voluntary, and the information you will you provide will be kept confidential. The survey will take about 15 minutes and you can stop at any time. So it's a standard consent form that we agree to. So I will say, yes, I agree, but please switch back to English because my Vietnamese is not good. Okay, so thank you for agreeing to participate. Where do you work? In which country? And what is your position in your organization? So it's trying to get some background information about me. So I say I work in Thailand as an evaluation specialist. So I'll just keep my agency hidden from it. Thank you. What worked well in UNICEF's response to Typhoon Yagi? So the after action review survey and interviews were structured after the Harvard approach to after action reviews, which is to essentially ask 3 questions about what worked well, what didn't work well, and what could work better. And then it follows up with that with some choices of some deep dive topics, but that's the basic structure. So this is the motivation for this initial question. So what worked well? Maybe I will respond the pre-positioning of supplies and the surge support worked. So you see the history of the conversation is also here, so you can refer back to it. Can you give me an example of how the pre-positioning of supplies worked effectively? So it's trying to dig deeper and probe and ask me for examples to concretize the evidence that it's getting. So I will entertain it and say we pre-positioned, let's say hygiene. It's 12 months in advance before the typhoon in anticipation of the cycle season when Typhoon Yagi hit, we were able to quickly deploy the supplies and get them to affected populations. So I'll keep the misspellings in there because you can understand what I mean. Okay, so the documents I have indicate that UNICEF prepositioned supplies like water purification tablets, water tanks, and ceramic filters. Can you clarify what type of hygienes were prepositioned 12 months in advance? So the agent has been grounded on actual documents like the SITREPs, the supply plans, the project documents. So it has all of this information and is going back to those and validating my question, my answer with its own information and trying to check essentially the information that I provided. Is it that I'm making this up, or is it actually new information that I didn't have before? So here I can also just say, I don't have the exact information about what was in the kits, but I know that we also had procured water purification tablets and RUTS, something like that. So it's okay to also say you don't have that information. So thank you for that clarification. What worked, what did not work well in UNICEF's response to Typhoon Yagi? So this is the second area of questioning. We are going to look at what didn't work well. And so here I want to also demonstrate that in the responses, if you give it some irrelevant answer or something tangentially relevant, it'll try to steer you back into the conversation. So if I say something completely offhand, like the rain in Vietnam falls mostly on the plains, a quip from My Fair Lady, it will come back and say Typhoon Yagi primarily impacted northern Vietnam, not the plains. North Vietnam is mountainous and hilly. Can you clarify what you meant by it? Okay, so it's fact checking me on the where rain falls and trying to steer me back. And so I'm going to acknowledge that and say, okay, in terms of what didn't work, the communications was a. I'll come back to the its original answer. Can you elaborate on the communication problems during the Typhoon Yagi response? So I kept it essentially vague in there, but I will now clarify a bit more. I will say, for example, the cell towers and the landlines were broken by the heavy rains, and it was difficult to get information in the immediate aftermath of the typhoon. So which of these categories are you most informed about and would like to discuss further? So it's now moved on to the third area of questioning, which is asking me to pick one of these categories: preparedness, response, or risk-informed programming and resilience building, and wants me to pick one of them to ask me further about those. And here, I also want to demonstrate that you can ask a clarification question. So for example, if I don't know what is risk-informed programming, I can ask it, I don't know what you mean by risk-informed programming. Can you clarify? Okay, so risk-informed programming refers to development and humanitarian programs that consider and address existing and future climate and disaster risks. Now, which of these categories are you most informed about and would like to discuss further? Preparedness, response, or risk-informed programming? So here, since I think I will pick preparedness, please. Let's see what comes up with. So UNICEF worked with local governments on emergency preparedness plans before Typhoon Yagi. How adequate were UNICEF country office capacities and the appropriateness of the office structure for the scale of the emergency? So here, for example, I could say, I think having the agreed project documents with the government prior to the Typhoon Yagi helped speed up response. So giving a good example of preparedness. What aspect of UNICEF preparedness specifically do you think could be improved for future emergencies? So here I could say, for example, that we could have more LTAs, long-term agreements. So I'll just keep that vague. How confident are you in that? So it's continuously probing me to get more details and get more information, and it'll test the level of confidence that I have in the answers that I'm giving. So here, at this point, I could also just say, I want to move on to the next question. If I get frustrated with the too many probing, can we move on to the next question? Spell like that. Okay. So now it's coming to the end of it. It summarizes everything that we've talked about. You mentioned the pre-positioning of supplies and search support worked well, but communications were hampered by damaged infrastructure. You suggested having more LTAs could improve preparedness. Is there anything else you would like to share about UNICEF's response to Typhoon Yagi again? So maybe I'll have it on the back by saying I think the use of AI in the Yagi AR was an innovative step hopefully you'll take my compliment. Thank you for your time and insight. I just moved on, so you can contact me at this address with any information, and that concludes the survey. Goodbye. So that's a wrap. Now let me switch back to the presentation. You see the screen again? Okay. All right. So the conceptual model of the AI survey agent, this interface is written in Python, and it interacts with a trained large language model that's hosted on the cloud. And the LLM, the large language model, is a Gemini model that's been fine-tuned on the kind of dialogue that an evaluator would typically engage in with a key informant. So questions to identify change, to trace causes, to assess value or merit or worth. And it's also grounded on the documents, on the relevant documents to this particular assessment or evaluation. So for example, the SIT reps, the project plans, any information that the evaluator would need to be fluent in before engaging with a key informant. And the interface also takes advantage of all the tools that are provided on the web, like Google Translate and audio transcription, etc. And everything is stored on an internal database, including the questions and the answers with a timestamp and a unique code for each respondent. Some of the other safety features or other features that are there but not visible is that the large language model also has flags to allow you to ensure that it doesn't produce any objectionable content, like harmful or hateful or explicit language. And everything is also inside of a private cloud, enterprise secured cloud. So it's just like your Gmail or Google Drive. It's password protected behind there. And it also can export its data to Excel format, so you can be able to view it and use your preferred analytical tools to process that. Now, something else that happens that's somewhat invisible in each time that a survey agent is invoked is that there's a script that runs in the cloud that retrieves all of the responses collected so far. And there's a second agent that codes and clusters those transcripts into themes and reinserts those themes into the ground knowledge of the present AI survey agent. And this allows the survey agent to be able to validate the themes or refine them and in real time essentially analyze and do that validation as the data is being collected. So initially I built this logic into the survey agent, but later seeing that it could be used also for traditional interview transcripts, I extracted that out as a separate agent so I can asynchronously process surveys at any time. I also took it one more step beyond the thematic theme development to further situate the findings within the broader literature and guidance and research of the subject area. So let me quickly show you that one as well. Let's go to the Analyst agent and switch my window again. All right, so everyone hopefully sees this interface. A very simple one this time, a thematic content analyst, and you put your response there, the transcripts here, and you press send, and it should process it. And I prepared a sample transcript here. So this is just fictitious. I went through myself and pretended to be a respondent and created question or responded to his questions that was coming up for different respondents here. So I can demo to you because the actual transcripts would be confidential and cannot be shared. So what I do, and this is exactly the format that the database outputs. You get the interviewer, what question was asked, you get the interview with a unique code, what was answered, and sequentially those are printed out until you get to the next interviewee, number 46, and so on. So all I have to do is take those transcripts and put them, put them into this window and press send, and it'll start to process that. Now, while it's processing, just to tell you a bit of what's happening there, this agent, this thematic analyst agent, it's been few shot prompted on real-world open source research, samples of transcripts that have been coded by expert researchers. So it's not just a naive, putting the transcripts into ChatGPT and asking it to code, but it's actually been trained for this particular purpose. After it creates the codes, after it gets the transcripts, it's been instructed to create the codes based on a set of particular instructions, like referring to the documents that has been provided, referring to the objectives of the after-action review. Once it creates the codes, then it clusters them into themes around the 6 objectives of the after-action review. Things like sector coordination, internal coordination, preparedness response, and it references the codes that it uses in developing those clusters of themes. And then the third and final step that it's been tasked with is to analyze the themes within the frame of existing theories and frameworks of the subject of the review, to affirm them, to challenge them, or to provide alternative explanations of those. So those are the 3 stages of the analysis that it does. So here we have the response back. Here you have the codes. For example, rapid deployment of emergency themes is one code that was produced, and after it shows you the excerpt from the transcript that it derived that code from. And it goes through and shows you every code that's it's come up with based on the transcript excerpts. And there's no limits. I've not given it a limit on number of codes to produce, because at this stage, we just want to come up with as much as possible. In the thematic analysis, the next stage, then it's been asked to frame the themes around the objectives of the review. So here you see the themes that have been developed and the codes from that they're derived from. So there's the list of all the codes separated by these asterisks. And then at the end of it, there's a brief description of what this theme reflects. So the theme reflects UNICEF's ability to quickly deploy personnel, assess needs, deliver essential supplies and assistance. This aligns with objectives 1 and 2 by demonstrating adequacy of effectiveness of UNICEF preparedness and response mechanism. So it's linking the theme back to the objectives of the after-action review, which was about preparedness and response, and referring to the codes that it uses to develop that. So you have those themes under different objectives. And then the third part is the analysis. So it takes each of those themes and assesses it within the literature, within the studies, within the documents, and reflects on what it means. Does it reaffirm? Does it challenge or provide an alternative explanation of what's there? So there you have the analysis under those themes and final summary of that. So there's the quick brief of the thematic analyst. And now let me go back and just quickly wrap up with some final thoughts. Okay. So, learnings and implications. So in terms of the learnings, I also structured it around what worked well, what didn't work well, and what could be better. And I think in terms of what worked well, we were managed to deploy it very rapidly, the agent, and it got 100% response. And the respondents spent around 30 minutes to an hour with the agent, and they seem to be engaged from reading the conversation scripts. And another advantage of it was that it was available anytime that people wanted to answer. So even if two people wanted to respond or be interviewed at the same time, and some people responded in English and some in Vietnamese and some in other languages, so it was also more accommodating to the needs of the participants. What didn't work well, sometimes they were repetitive questions, or it seemed like the agent forgot something someone had said before or asked it in a different way, but repeated the question. And some questions came that were tangentially relevant. Sometimes it probed a bit too much, which made people start to give shorter answers, and it seemed to miss the cues, the social cues of, people are getting tired of the probing. And what could be better, I think, in terms of the interfacing, to be able to quickly tune the survey without re-engineering it while it was running. So for example, if you wanted to add more documents to its ground knowledge to ingest, or you wanted to add additional instructions or remove instructions, and this happened in real time. For example, we found that the probing questions were not appropriate, so we wanted to retrain it or fine-tune it slightly, give it new instructions on appropriate types of probing questions. So I had to go back and kind of do the coding with that. But if there was a management interface, it would have made it easier. And the second element is that we had a fixed set of interviews, which is how studies are set up and costed based on the time to interview and analyze the data of X number of key informants. But this could be more targeted and real time, as we discovered the need, for example, to further probe some themes, or perhaps because evidence is starting to converge or saturating. So you don't need to continue to reach your sample size. And that's an area that could be improved. But ultimately, in terms of the broader implications, and I come to this from an applied science perspective, I'm mostly interested in how this technology can be used in practice in evaluation. And reflecting on this experiment, I think this is another tool to automate portions of the evaluation workflow, just like in the other tool. It complements, but it doesn't substitute the role of the evaluation manager. And as a manager, I still need to think critically about where it fits and the value it brings, because the agent won't give me the critical and priority overarching questions for the evaluation, or what design and approach is most suited to answer those. I still need to decide what instruments are appropriate in my design, what are the constraints, do the risk assessment of those, and then oversee the whole process using the right tools at the right stage of the evaluation workflow. I do see the potential of the technology to further democratize evaluation practice, something that's not just for elite institutions or large programs or budget, but also medium-sized operations, the implementing partners using it. And anyone who wants to have the credible evidence that's working, the evidence about what's working well and to what ends, and perhaps doesn't have the luxury of the large budget that this has typically required. So this drop, I think, is going to free up a lot of resources for those larger organizations and donors to be more in the role of synthesis of evidence and in leading evaluation system strengthening and providing the normative guidance in evaluation. And in this particular case, I think in this particular after-action review of Yagi, I found that it was useful. I think my perception is that it has the potential for other humanitarian real-time evaluations, and you might find that it's useful for development sector evaluations, for making it more cost-effective, fair in accessibility of people of different abilities, and the speeding from the conception to reporting. the workflow of the evaluation. So I look forward to see where this experiment leads us, and I'm cautiously optimistic about the opportunities it brings. Now, I want to turn it over to you for your reflections and questions or clarification if you want to answer. And I put up some questions on my own there if you care to answer those. How do you see this AI agents using your area of work? And what limits or obstacles do you see in its use and utility in the short and long term? And what is your wish to see in the AI agent to make it better serve your purposes? So feel free to write your question in the chat box or raise your hand to speak. I'll try to give the voice to people who want to speak, to prioritize questions in person. And if any time remains, I'll switch to answering questions in the chat box. But I'll take all of the chat box questions and try to put it into FAQ and respond by email or put them up somewhere. So let me. Apologies for people who are in the queue. I'm looking at the chat box. If nobody has their hands up, I can just answer some of these questions. How do you deal with bogus entries? Some people might interact with it and test it as novelty. Might be interesting for some. Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, in this case, it was a targeted survey sent to people that were selected to be sampled to answer it. So in that sense, it was a bit more controlled, but I can see how when you share it openly, you could get a diversity of responses and people who are entering bogus responses. And I guess my answer to that is just like with, as I showed you with some of the fact checking, some of that validation gets done in real time because the agent has access to all of the background documents, and it tries to also steer you back into the line of questioning that's been assigned to it, to talk about the Yagi response, or if the survey was about vaccination, then to bring you back into that conversation. So there's some level of validation that gets done so that when the evaluator gets the transcript, at least there's some level of vetting of real respondents, and their information has been to some extent fact checked. But of course, as I said, this is a workflow and there needs to be some oversight. The evaluation manager does need to have certain accountability to make sure that these things are done appropriately. You don't want to, for example, do too much probing. Like one of the things in this after action review was that the probing was perhaps a bit too much, and people felt like they were being fact checked, or at least we felt that they were being fact checked, and that might turn some people off. So we decided to turn that off at some point but these are all design decisions. How important is the validity, who you're sending it to, how confident you are about the information you get, and the other methods that I mentioned about convergence and watching the saturation of information to see where you want to turn it off. All right. Hello. Did AI generate those questions following your prompt, or are you already feeding the question library? Yeah, so the questions that are coming, so this is kind of like a semi-structured interview, right? So the same way that an interview and evaluation would get a semi-structured interview guide, which would have very broad questions, what went well? And based on that, then it's instructed to probe further. And even in the probing, you might give it samples of probing questions, but not specific. So the questions it comes up with is really based on the instructions it's been given, the semi-structured interview guide, the grounding knowledge that's been provided to it, all the documents, the background knowledge that it has, the guidance it's been given, how many questions to ask, what form of questions, the training that has been provided on the fine-tuning of what an evaluative questions are in trying to understand change and trying to understand the root causes, and also the other element, which is that real-time theme development and convergence on certain themes that are evolving. So in a sense, all of these are coming together to formulate the questions, and it's not a canned series of questions or what are kind of like in survey where you have workflows. If you said this, then if they said that, then answer this. It's not anything like that. It's more like you've given it some instructions and given it the documents and given it the training, and it goes out and formulates the questions within that structure that you've given it. Any insights on privacy and data protection when you feed project documents? Yeah, good question. So as I mentioned, the whole of the system runs inside of a Google Cloud. So this is a personal, private Google Cloud atmosphere where your database, your models, the documents that you load are all only private to you and password protected, just like your Google Drive or Gmail. So only you would have access to it, and the model that also runs within that environment has access to those. There does need to be some level of protection because you could ask it, for example, questions like I did. I asked it clarification questions, and it could come back and provide information from those grounding documents. So there needs to be instructions given to it, clear instructions to say, for example, don't share any excerpt, any direct quote from the documents, but in principle, use the information to inform your questions, but don't. And there's further levels of protection that can be provided, and this is something that may be something I'll be working on, not just for this purpose, but for another one. But there's a benefit to having two agents in this kind of a system, where one of them is the one that is the creator of the instructions for the survey, and the second one who actually interfaces with the user. And only the one who has who's the instruction maker will have the access to the documents. So that agent would process the documents, create the instructions, and give only the instructions to the second agent who creates the questions that interface with the user. So that also adds another layer to prevent any leaking of information to the end user. So again, these are all design decisions because they have implications on the speed and the utility of the tool and how it works. But this is why an evaluation manager still has to critically think about how they want to design these. Any insights? And if anybody wants to speak, feel free. I can unmute you as well if you want to ask the question in person. I'm just going to go from the top to bottom. And have you seen people's answers get shorter as they go through the question due to typing and fatigue that comes? Yes, I mean, exactly. That was one of the things that we noticed as we were going through with one respondent, was that the probing questions, initially they gave very full answers, but as the agent probed further and further, the responses were becoming shorter. And the agent, at least not yet, is not sensitive to those social cues that someone is getting frustrated. And perhaps this is part of also us getting used to doing surveys with these kinds of agents as they become popular, is to know that you can tell it just like you would to a live interviewer that, you want to skip the question, or I'm done, let's go to the next question, or I'm tired. And when you talk to it, it actually understands and it moves on. But it just is not yet good at picking out those cues from length of responses. So that's something to be worked on in the future. But good point on that. Did you encounter any challenges with the accuracy of audio processing? Did accuracy vary between language? So just a disclosure on this one, we decided to turn off the audio processing, at least the one that's offered by the system itself. You can still use, of course, you know how when you go on your browser on your phone, you have that option to click and it transcribes everything you say, and that transcription then gets sent into the box where you type it. So I don't know if people use that because that's something between them and their phone how they do it. But I turned off the feature that was um, on the system itself. So it also has a recorder where you can record, because that one it required a lot of bandwidth, and I thought that in this case I just keep it light and simple, and we can do it in the next iteration. But in my own testing of it, the live transcript didn't work as well as the one where your own built-in phone one. So that's also another area that to be worked on, is to improve that live transcription to also be perhaps in streaming. Not that you push a button, but you actually have a conversation and it speaks back to you, which would also help with engaging with people of different abilities as well. Maybe you've covered this. However, wouldn't this tool have very little usability in low and middle income countries where literacy rates might be very low? Education is proportional to socioeconomic status. Wouldn't that introduce sampling bias? Okay, I understand the first part of it, but maybe Hina, if you want to come in and explain the second part, how you associate sampling bias with the okay, so I think maybe I'll answer it, and if it doesn't answer your question, this one, of course, as I mentioned in the beginning, we used it only internally with UNICEF colleagues, but I see when you say conceptually, if we roll this out with different users. So this goes back to the previous question about, for example, being able to use the audio. So someone who doesn't want to type in or doesn't know how to type it or is uncomfortable with that could also use the audio. And you could still have, for example, an enumerator who carries this with them to the communities and uses it as a tool. Like I said, this is a tool that has to be decided within the context. The evaluation manager has to decide where is the appropriate use of it and how, in what form. It doesn't necessarily have to be a URL that you send to them, but it could be also you still use enumerators, but they don't need to be necessarily as trained, and you get over some of the issues with intra-enumerator reliability biases. So that I think what you mean by the sampling bias is around that people who would not be able to answer it would self-select themselves out of the sample. So in that way, as a evaluation manager, as a researcher, you would design it in a way where you reduce that risk in the way that it's rolled out. What was your time frame for backend development and testing? Is a time constrained emergency situation? In a time constrained emergency situation, what time frame would you recommend as sufficient? Yeah, so I've done demos of this, like quick adaptations of it for demoing for other offices, and it doesn't take more than a day. I mean, if someone wants to use the same structure, the same format, but just change the instructions, for a new survey. Let's say you want to know about parents' perceptions about vaccination for children, and you have your own set of documents that are related to that, the vaccine schedule in this particular country. It doesn't take more than a day to rebrand this and have it ingested with the documents and the instructions. It's mostly the time of testing it. If people will test it and feel like, okay, I want to change this, I want to change that, but really to rebrand it, to create a new version of it, it doesn't take very long. So in that sense, it's very quick to redeploy. And as I said, once you deploy it, it can be used by 10, 100, a million people, because it's running on a very stable structure, the Google Cloud, that serves also your Google Docs and Gmail. So it's capable of scaling very to very large numbers of users. Great session. Thank you. Would love to speak up, but I'm at work. Okay, no problem. Okay, so that all your participants could be at a certain educational, you could miss out on people who can't read or type. However, audio processing, as you mentioned, would solve this problem to some extent. Thanks for your thoughtful answers. You're welcome. Great. So I don't see any more points, any other questions, and I realize it's late for some people, and I also need to shift out. So I really appreciate the time you guys have spent with me today. I just want to quickly leave you with a QR code so you can try this demo yourself. At home or at your work to see how it works. And my email is there if you want to reach out and discuss anything further. But just also conclude by giving a shout out to my colleagues who responded to the Yagi typhoon in Vietnam, like they do with every emergency that puts children at risk, which is with skill, with compassion, and with urgency. And with that, thank you, and watch this thread, because I think it's going to lift the floor and the ceiling. Thank you and goodbye.